All right, well, welcome everybody to our June monthly webinar. And look, it's so grateful that we have quite a lot of people across Australia as well, and also across the globe as well, joining us for our webinars in the past few months as well. We've got a fantastic presentation lined up for you today. So Ascolite is a professional association that focuses on educational technology and learning as well. We are a learning design special interest group. We have at the moment 380 plus members, and we would love to engage in more practitioners and individuals interested in the area of learning design as well. So there's a QR code there. Feel free to scan that and sign up to our group. It's free. It's open to everyone across the globe as well. So a warm welcome to everybody. Myself, Leanne Ngo, and also Kashmira Dave and Keith Higgard co-lead our special interest group. We do run monthly webinars, reading groups, and also we've got some good news with our podcasting coming up as well. Ascolite runs a fantastic annual conference, and this year it's held in December in the University of Sydney. The program is to be confirmed, available, but please make sure you go into the website and keep up to date with that as well. Now, before we begin, we do, on behalf of the Learning Design Special Interest Group, we would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting. So for me, that's the Boonwurrung land on the Kulin Nations. We do pay our respects for our elders past and present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So feel free to acknowledge and your support as well in the chat area. So today we have Professor Patsie Poley. So fantastic presenter today, focused on approaches to professional skills building across degree programs. But a bit about Patsie. So Patsie is a University of New South Wales Scientia Education Fellow and co-director of the Scientia Education Academy. She's also an education-focused academic champion and a professor in pathology within the School of Medical Sciences in the University of New South Wales in Sydney. She's a recognised national and international scholar. She's been invited to the International ePortfolio Able Board member, and also she's a member of our National ePortfolios Australia Organising Committee. Now, Patsie infuses her extensive medical research experience into educational practice by strategically integrating innovative adaptive lessons, ePortfolio pedagogy, and collaborative communities of practice for students to learn career-relevant professional skills. Patsie leads BadgeCop, which is a community of practice focused on microcredentialing within the University of New South Wales. So welcome to Patsie. Now, the brief, this is quite interesting in the area of looking at developing professional skills across degree programs. The presentation will look at building that awareness of their professional skills development in a experiential learning opportunities space in that area as well. And the focus on microcredentialing has been obviously received quite hype in the last recent years as well, and Patsie will be able to present and talk a bit about that in today's session. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Patsie. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leanne, and organisers of this webinar series. It's an absolute pleasure for me to join you today from the UNSW campus. So can you see my screen, first of all? Looks like you can, thank you. I would also like to acknowledge the BadgeCop people from where I teach at UNSW campus as the traditional custodians of these lands. And I would also like to acknowledge the First Nations people as the first educators on the lands where UNSW campuses are located, and pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So Leanne has given a really nice overview of what I plan to present today, and it really comes back to what the title is telling us, the approaches not only taken by myself, but by colleagues at the University of New South Wales and beyond in terms of building professional skills across degree programs. I always like to come back to our institutional priorities as a start point for why I like to infuse new ways of doing and innovation into our courses and programs, and how I like to motivate not only our students but our colleagues in thinking about what they're doing in their classrooms and beyond. So this is a triangulated view of our graduates in terms of what we would like them to be upon graduation, and it comes down to becoming global citizens, scholars, leaders, and professionals. So today I'll really touch on the parts in red that I've highlighted, trying to bring across the idea of instilling in students the understanding of their discipline and its interdisciplinary context, and also having capable abilities of ethical, self-directed practice and independent lifelong learning. And I think a lot of us who work in the ePortfolio sphere like this concept of lifelong learning, and we really like the idea of ePortfolios as a vehicle for allowing that to happen. So I don't do this on my own. While I instigate quite a bit of activity, I also recognize that building communities, collaboration, and combining talent is key to how these things pan out and how these things play out, not only in a course, but of course in a program, a degree program. So I not only teach and work with colleagues and within my school and faculty, but across the University of New South Wales, and also that spills into the national and international arenas. And when we're thinking about skills, the whole idea of developing those skills and recognizing those skills for students is very important. And what we have learnt during these COVID times is that upskilling and repurposing our skill sets is super important in adapting to change. So today I'll be talking about ePortfolio, the concept of badging, and what I like to call nano and micro-credentialing, and virtual laboratories. So let's start with the whole idea of recognizing professional skills development, the whole idea of linking reflective practice, experiential learning, and all the other things that students do along the way, not only at university, but outside of university, to build up their graduate attributes. So the challenge. This work started with a challenge, and that challenge is teamwork. And let's face it, a lot of our students find teamwork activities challenging. But when we rephrase this in terms of understanding that assessment tasks, when coupled with reflective practice and asking students to think about the types of skills they're building, in particular professional skills. A lot of people call these soft skills, generic skills. I tend to refer to them as professional skills because, to be honest, these are the skills that are quite difficult to master and are required in our workplaces. So teamwork is such a skill that is required for success in a workplace, and of course communication is coupled to that. But there is some significance in building these skills, and the significance comes back to visualizing them and making sense of how they've formed as part of a degree program. So we would like the idea of visualizing graduate attributes in teamwork and launching into this idea of professional skills and career development learning. We want these skills to be visualized by students. Now, students come to university to engage in a career development learning and their program of activities via their degree program, of course, but there's other things that they learn along the way, and we need to really make that explicit for our students. We also have to understand that stakeholders and educators need to know this is happening, and also that we visualize these skills and we recognize these as achievement and badges of achievement. So these are the concepts that I'd like to bring across today. And I'd also like to convince you that assessment tasks within disciplines, within coursework programs, degree programs that is, are authentic not only to our discipline and viewed as skills building, but can also be seen as mini work experiences. Because a lot of us design these learning experiences to be in alignment with what the discipline values and what the field values and what the career values. So I'd like you to think about this as a new way of looking at assessment tasks. So let's think about professional skills development. I always start with a course example because this is where the design starts to happen, especially with tasks and assessment tasks that are authentic to our discipline. So I'm a medical research scientist by trade, and to communicate research is super important in our sphere. So we've implemented a task called the Research Impact Symposium, which is a team presentation worth 30%. So it's worth quite a lot of the course schedule. And the whole idea is to improve student skills in research and teamwork. So we instill the idea and we design the task to build up these research practices, critical thinking, evaluation and reflection on the types of skills learnt, but also develop teamwork skills. And teamwork skills is also wrapped into research and communication skills, because students have to work together as a team to research a topic and come back as a panel and discuss it. So communication is super important. As part of this, we've built in the concept of ePortfolio pedagogy, where students are thinking about the types of skills and the research skills they're presenting with their team in terms of their professionalism. So they are taking the role of researcher, they're presenting their project, they're learning how to speak about it confidently and communicate key aspects of the research in a team. So it's quite a complex task, but the portfolio segment of it is the reflective practice part of the work. So we ask students, how do you develop these skills if you're not given opportunity? So we give the opportunity as part of coursework. So the implementation practice that we've developed is to enable reflective practice that is connected to various aspects of the course, but in particular, this assessment task, which we call the Research Impact Symposium, which is really aimed at building those teamwork and collaborative skills. And students are asked as part of that task to reflect critically on their learning of skills. And that reflection, while we talk about it at the beginning of the course, so at day one, when the course kicks off, students are asked to think about what they're doing as they travel through their course, but also post engagement with the task, in particular the Research Impact Symposium, and to blog about those experiences. So we use a blogging tool within Moodle called OU Blog, and the whole idea is students are organically thinking and writing about those experiences. Okay, I have a reflective rubric that I've developed so we can mark these types of blogs, but that is not revealed to the students. And the purpose of that is to give students the opportunity to write organically, write from the heart, write from their personal experience, rather than writing to a rubric. So while we have a rubric, it's purely a guideline for us to evaluate the sorts of thinking that comes through that portfolio work. So here it is, the implementation. Students can reflect on the course, various aspects of that, but they really need to reflect on one particular aspect, being the Research Impact Symposium and the development of teamwork skills. They're given the option to write one blog or several blogs. That's their choice. So at minimum, we examine one particular blog on teamwork. Students are also asked to evaluate one another. Okay, so I'm not in the team. I evaluate the performance of the team in terms of the product that is being presented on the day, being the panel discussion as part of the Research Impact Symposium, but students evaluate themselves and one another. And we took this rubric that is provided by the AAC&U, the American Association for Colleges and Universities, and we adapted it. And we brought in this extra element of adaptability and negotiation because we as educators saw that this was a potential issue in all of our classrooms, all of our courses, okay, and all of our teamwork assessment tasks. So the format has been, we have the assessment task in terms of design. We give students the opportunity to develop the research behind that task and present it in a panel discussion. But a component of that is also dedicated to teamwork skills. And then the other component is dedicated to reflective blogging. So you can see how there's an interrelationship in how these elements may work together as part of the task. And this was the framework, not only this particular skills development framework, but the process and the method that we would apply across programs and in various courses that various colleagues were interested in using. Okay, so we worked initially with the medical sciences in terms of building up from years 1, 2, 3, 4 to think about professional readiness and career awareness and work across the medical science disciplines, being anatomy, pathology, pharmacology, and physiology. Oh, this is self-progressing now. That's interesting. So we've also looked at the whole idea of developing a particular set of teamwork skills that works within our courses in the third year. Okay, so this was the critical point, coming into the third year and then working transversely across context and across discipline. And that worked quite well. So this was the whole idea of working across a program, a degree program within the medical science degree, so Bachelor of Medical Science. We've since gone a bit further and we've worked up a project in recent times to apply pedagogy in terms of ePortfolio pedagogy to a framework that would be rolled out across many degree programs across the University of New South Wales, and coming back to the whole concept of our triangulated view of our students becoming global citizens, scholars, leaders, and professionals. And this was worked up by an EF or education focused fellowship team across UNSW. So people coming in from business, from UNSW Canberra, from engineering, from science. So again, this cross-degree program approach to developing elements in an ePortfolio that would speak to student skills development and visualization. So not only did we start with a course in terms of how we would get this process working and this method, we then applied the method throughout the degree program in the Bachelor of Medical Science, and then we applied it a bit further. All right, so I've got a lot of questions coming in. Do we need to stop at this point?
Yeah, if you think appropriate, Patsie.
I would like to keep going if that's okay, because there are a lot of questions on all sorts of things, and that might be best addressed holistically at the end.
Yeah, sure.
I'll collate all the questions and then feed them back to you right at the end, Patsie. You keep going.
Fantastic. Excellent. All right. So reflective practice. And the reason why I implemented reflective practice initially into my particular course, and then we rolled this out throughout the degree program in medical science, and then we spoke to our colleagues in engineering. So it came back initially to the STEM disciplines, but of course this can be rolled out further. And the rationale was that reflective practice using ePortfolio pedagogy raises student awareness of their professional skills in teamwork building as part of the coursework. So when you ask students to think about what they're doing, they're actually really engaging in a process of awareness and building it up further and saying, wow, I've got this skill set now. It was always there, but you know, with people like me who are interested in science and medical science, we're always interested in the content first. And we tend to bypass all these other skills that we're building along the way, but they're very much integrated. And we need to make that explicit for our students. And that was a really important process for everybody. So again, the why behind this reflective practice was that how do we as higher education teachers enable that behavior, because quite frankly, I wasn't very good at reflective practice. However, when I thought differently about the sorts of reflective practice that I performed, it was often troubleshooting in a lab, often thinking about the things that went wrong in an experiment and how I could connect the dots and make sense of that, and then all of a sudden come up with a strategy to address that. So it was building awareness of the way I was thinking about a problem or an issue, making sense of that, coming back and resolving it, coming back and forth. So this whole tango approach was super important in building awareness and the skill. So the reality is reflection and reflective practice is generally an uncomfortable space for us scientists in the making. And that was true not only for me as an educator and a scientist when I was in training, but also for my students. And I wanted to enable that practice for them. So the quest for knowledge for us, the knowledge acquisition, the facts, the stuff, often bypasses the idea of reflecting on what that knowledge is once it's acquired and how it can be applied. So how do we shift that culture? How do we begin to shift from concrete knowledge acquisition to not so concrete reflective practice? So the concrete knowledge acquisition in the research task, collecting all that research information, making sense of it, bringing it together for a discussion, a panel discussion in the Research Impact Symposium, doing all the doing, and then thinking about what that means in terms of professional skills, as well as presenting the facts, the information to the audience. So the issue comes back to the culture of learning. Determine what is valued within a discipline. So I talked about this to my colleagues, and some disciplines are very comfortable with the idea of reflective practice. We in STEM are somehow a little bit more uncomfortable, but when we pin it to a task and start to make sense of that task and design that in, it becomes very powerful. And students were reflecting and thinking quite differently about their research task, and also thinking about their teamwork skills and overcoming the thing that most students struggle with, which was, I don't really like teamwork. I don't really like working as a group. And then they overcame that and thought, I've got a skill in negotiation now. I've got a skill in collaboration, all these other things that came out of that rubric. The language also has to be modified. I would really encourage that. So the art of science, where we're collecting core facts and data, needs an interrogative and iterative process. Right? So I like to rephrase the language. It is a tango between observation and critical thinking. We do build awareness and we understand the thinking. So we build awareness of thinking, then we start to understand it. And this is really metacognition. So becoming comfortable, my students became comfortable with reflecting. We gave them feedback on the reflective process. We marked the blogs. We saw some really amazing things coming out of them. And we also talked about how we change from analyzing data, making sense of this, networking it to make a bigger constellation, and really using critical thinking and reflective practice, which are very much foundational in becoming professional scientists. And students start to become super comfortable with this. So this method of task, evaluation of each other's skills, to become aware of your skill and also write about that, has become super powerful and implemented across programs. Okay, so becoming comfortable again, addressing the uncomfortable zone. The process of developing the reflective practice was super important, integrating authentic tasks, and we can focus on research or any sort of clinical scientific learning, and students can comfortably reflect on their skills development by performing these tasks. Not just about the doing, about, wow, this is what I've got now and what I can bring to a workplace. I've got this skill. So I'll talk about that a little bit more. And this was the scaffolding process. We asked students to think about various course aspects by prompt questions, and then we came back to the assessment task. And again, that mini work experience concept, from dependent to independent learners, from doers to thinkers, super important. And the prompt questions, very important, colleagues, in terms of implementation and the linkage of course content to external opportunities and transferable skills from one stage to the next. So asking students to really think about what they're building up. And this is a view on how we used this in Moodle. We used OU Blog, we reflect, we use various prompt questions, and we ask students to not only upload a Word version, but also put it through Turnitin. Okay, and it's amazing. Every single blog that we've looked at is authentic. It's the student's own work. It's coming from the heart, and you know, it's not writing to a rubric. It's been a really interesting observation. So let's come back to the concept of badging and nano and micro-credentialing. So this is a schema of some badges we worked up as part of another project. So while you have your skills developing, and this is all very fantastic in particular courses and degree programs, how do students then talk about these, for example, in a portfolio, very explicitly, very quickly, very carefully, in a very curated way? And I propose that badges or nano credentials are the way forward. And it's a good way of recognizing these skills, because these skills, as we just talked about, are very much integrated in curriculum and assessment tasks. So while they're authentic to discipline, how do you talk about that in an academic transcript, which is a series of marks related back to the course? And it's a final mark, and it's not really broken down into pieces that students can clearly talk about. And let's face it, I may not be able to clearly talk about something that I achieved in year 1 versus something that I may have achieved in year 4 honours by the end of my degree. The year 4 honours is probably more apparent in my mind. So it gives our students a mechanism to explicitly discuss where and how they mastered these competencies as part of their learning journeys. This was part of another project. I've done a series of projects that come back to learning design that have been applied not only within courses, within degree programs, that have been taken up by other folks internationally, nationally. So this is why I work in communities, I work with colleagues, students as partners, and so on. And the benefit of a badging or micro-credentialing system is that students get to recognize their skills, they package them up in these vessels of information, and they can transport them out to LinkedIn or transport them into their portfolio and really easily, comfortably talk about these things. So it's a way of validating the skills. It really has to be warranted by the universities, and they're these tiny little credentials that may have life-wide and lifelong value for our learners. Let's go back a little bit, everybody, to micro-credentials, badges, and the design characteristics. They need to be competency-based, they need to be on-demand, shareable, and personalised. So this is where the ePortfolio starts to marry up with the badge concept. So you may have evidence of some experiences in a portfolio, you may have some reflections that come back to that experience. You would also theoretically have a badge that sits not far away from that, and students can use those badges to talk about their skills. And there are different badges for different purposes, and here we see some from Harvard and RMIT and IBM. So they've been used for various reasons across various sectors, and this is not new. This was super new in 2016 and a little bit earlier, but now it's been around for a while, the concept of badges and micro-credentialing. But what do we do with these badges? Right? Are they just icons that we talk to as an image, or do they create a space for data and information that we can also talk to? This is the other concept I'd like to bring home to you. We talked about the UNSW Teamwork Skills Development Framework that was worked up and adapted a little bit further for our context and beyond by our team, our medical sciences academic team. But I would encourage people to think about rubrics as a vessel of information for qualitative data that can sit behind a badge. And this was a project that I worked up with BadgeCop, our badging community of practice, which was a community of practice formed by people across the university from various faculties and degree programs. Each person came with their particular interest. Some people wanted to build up critical thinking, other people wanted teamwork skills, other people wanted creativity, ethics, and so on. So if I can take you back to this AAC&U set of value rubrics. It is an amazing resource that can be used by academics to implement in their courses and degree programs for evaluating skills, professional skills, generic skills, soft skills development. All right, now we adapted this. We then adapted it further with our industry partner Edelex to use the rubric to sit behind a badge. So you can imagine all of these elements, these 6 elements, teamwork elements here in dark blue over on the side of this rubric, coming back to being used as various elements within a badge. Very powerful. So all of a sudden, you not only have an icon, but when you click on that badge, you've got information that sits behind it. Okay, so the 6 elements are sitting behind that badge. And this badge iconography was worked up in collaboration with BadgeCop and a student as a partner from Art and Design, Jessica Liang. So the concept of badges. Okay, so if we have different levels of attainment, if we have bronze, silver, gold, and platinum being levels of 1, 2, 3, and 4, that come back to levels 1, 2, 3, and 4 in this rubric, we can start to align and assign some evidence that sits behind the badge as a way of providing some sort of metadata that can sit behind the badge in terms of academic metadata or academic evaluation. And I would suggest this is now being worked up. It may not come to pass, it's still part of a project, okay, that these badges can sit very closely to the types of skills that may come through in a degree program. So if I can show you what that may look like. If I get a badge in teamwork from the Faculty of Medicine and Health, School of Medical Sciences, or Faculty of Medicine and Health, let's draw it back to that, and I get a level 3, which is a gold badge. I've got evidence that sits behind that, and that's the URL that you see there. And when you click on that URL, you get the rubric. Now it's reconfigured to look like a series of either elements that sit within silver or elements that sit within gold. And when you average the elements from that rubric, you get an average that sits at around 3. Let's call it that. This was the work we built up with Edelex. And at the time it was called Edelex Mastery Platform, but it's since gone to market and it's called Credentialing. So I might guide you back to that. And I must say I've got no financial interest, nothing at all with Credentialing. But our work was from the research and innovation perspective to put the evidence behind an icon for the purposes of student conversation. So students could use these badges, not only saying, I've got a badge, but it becomes a high stakes badge where there's a lot of information sitting behind it. So when I go up for an interview, I'm a student who's graduated from the University of New South Wales, and I've got a series of badges, and I'm saying that I have great teamwork skills. Well, the badge is telling the employer or the stakeholders outside of university that this is evident. All right, it's been university warranted. I have great teamwork skills. I'm adaptable and can negotiate with my colleagues. So that's a little bit of information there on how this may look in terms of the Credentialing platform. You can access that in your own time, but it since went to market, which was interesting in itself. So it's out there. But I have worked a lot with colleagues across the university to try and understand how to visualize these professional skills and using badges and nano credentials as a mechanism for doing that. And this is a few thank yous and acknowledgements from me as project leader to various people that worked with us to make this happen. So, but last but not least, as part of the talk, I'd like to now turn your attention to virtual labs and translating research findings and techniques to the classroom. And the reality of it is we've got these professional skills and they're very somehow embedded, implicit. But lab skills are also difficult to master, and they're somehow embedded and implicit, okay? And it is particularly difficult when students who are engaging in STEM degree programs walk away from the lab lesson, okay? So you're doing an experiment, part of your practical lesson that's been mapped out and formulated by the instructor, and it's an amazing lesson, but you walk out and you think, I can't remember what happened, okay? And it's not because I didn't get it, it was because a lot was happening and I'd like to revise it. So we set up a series of virtual laboratories to address this issue of student learning and revision once students had left that space. Our studies really showed that students found these tools very important for revision purposes, for also recapping information for the purposes of translating into other courses. So they became very valuable assets and tools for blending into our environments as we were teaching, well, what would have been, I guess, a blended environment. I wouldn't call it hybrid at the time. And with the onset of COVID, these virtual labs became very important elements and resources for us to use in our lessons. Okay. All right, so here we are. We developed quite a few labs as part of another series of projects. And these labs were embedded into the BEST network, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And again, this comes back to acknowledging the idea that students have to, in the STEM disciplines, work in labs, but also understand their discipline in terms of what that lab activity could produce, but also how to translate that across maybe other disciplinary contexts. Now, in a technique, if I'm doing a PCR or Western blots, types of molecular techniques, I can transfer that from cancer research to cardiovascular research. Students need to understand that some of the techniques are the mechanisms for coming across and transferring those skills. So that's why lab learning is super important, not only coming back to understanding how to diagnose a particular disease and understanding molecules, for example, in my context, in the medical sciences and molecular basis of disease, our Path 3205 course, which I introduced earlier on, but also making sense of how that can be transferred into other spaces. So how do I, Patsie, come across as a medical scientist who started using all these techniques and approached students with all these techniques in the real lab setting? How did I then translate that out to a virtual lab setting? Well, at the time we were working with Smart Sparrow. Smart Sparrow have since moved on, but we actually built a lot of virtual labs with Smart Sparrow, and we embedded these labs within a virtual lab loop, and it became part of the BEST network. And it was a fantastic time in our understanding of how we could push our knowledge to a new frontier, really, and develop systems that were accessible for all sorts of people. So it was a wonderful time in our workplace, and the BEST network was funded. We worked with our industry partner, Smart Sparrow. We got a lot of traction across the globe, working with colleagues internationally, nationally, to work up different types of lessons, not only virtual lab lessons, but also microscopy lessons and so on. Okay, so it was a fantastic time. BEST Network was our contribution to that space, and the virtual labs were part of that. And the molecular expression virtual labs were super critical for our science students in terms of multiple degree programs, but also could be used in terms of some of the elements we produced to teach our medicine students. So we're looking at several degree programs, thinking about the types of virtual lessons where we started to use it in a blended format, now coming back into a fully virtual environment in several degree programs. So when learning about virtual labs, I also worked on projects called the Phase 1 and Phase 2 prac projects. In fact, I led the Phase 1 prac project where we were developing online practical elements. So bite-sized versions of what we would get in these virtual lab environments to provide students with revision material and activities for learning in practicals. And this was implemented in phases 1 of the medicine program and actually phase 2 as well, with the phase 2 practical elements. So the whole idea was, again, working with colleagues, working collaboratively to build up these lessons and implement them across our degree programs. And we made a lot, actually. We made 42 reusable, adaptable OPEs, or online prac elements, right? So super cool work that came out of our project. We engaged discipline experts, content developers. We had a huge community of practice where our students came in as partners and worked with us as content developers. They understood the bottlenecks in learning in our degree programs, having been students themselves, having been tutors in the course, and together as a community, we produced something that was quite exceptional. And this is how we would implement these online practical elements in a blended environment. So we would teach in front of the room, come back to the equipment, and then come back to the lab online. And we would just tango back and forth, and allowing students to have repetition in what they were doing, allowing them to understand how this was happening at the conceptual level, but delivering it in various ways so it was very much embedded and supported. These are the analytics that were sitting behind the Smart Sparrow platform. So we as educators could see where students were going right or wrong in their various attempts at doing various things online in the lessons. So a very powerful way of understanding whether our approaches were working. And since that time, I've been fortunate enough to work with colleagues across the globe to work with a funding program offered through the DRRD and Universities Australia to build up labs abroad, actually, in other degree programs in Germany. So if we're just thinking a little bit about what this means, we had the transition for our students and staff going from a blended format where we use these virtual labs, coming into a fully virtual way of learning and doing. So we really now are coming back into this hybrid mode. And it's been interesting because I've taught these labs in term 1 now with these labs in a hybrid mode. So some students were in the room, I had cameras on me on the actual equipment, but then I could move across to the virtual lab, come back in, bring students in and out at various points in the lesson. Now, this isn't easy, but it's doable. And with time, I think we'll get better at it. And if we share practice, we'll be able to pull it off. So if I'm thinking about assessment and feedback and skills development, I've talked about ePortfolios and dashboards. They're becoming somehow very relevant now due to COVID times and the way students and instructors and the universities are thinking about what assessment means. We're thinking about new ways of innovating and modularizing courses, so the way we deliver courses and design aspects of our courses. And we're also thinking about the upskilling component of what we do as educators and people at the university that really care about what students are learning and really acquiring out of their university degree programs, not only just at the course level, but the whole degree program and that whole identity piece of who we're becoming. All right, so with that, I'd also like to thank a whole lot of people because we were funded. This work is not done without support and without really strong collaboration. So I'd really like to take this opportunity to thank you for listening and thank you for joining us today to hear about the types of approaches that I've used along with my colleagues to really embed what new ways of doing within courses and degree programs. So with that, I think I should probably stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much, Patsie. That was fantastic. Really enjoyed listening to that. Wow. Okay. The thing that really struck me was the very strategic way that it all seemed to join together. And I always wonder, was that did that fall out deliberately, or was it very carefully planned, or everything like that? But that's not my question. Yeah, and we do have lots and lots of questions. We've got about maybe 10 minutes, maybe 8 minutes for some questions.
Okay.
So if you've got some questions, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat, and we'll pick them up as we go through. But I just wanted to start off with something relating to the virtual labs, because one of the real challenges for universities as the university student cohort becomes increasingly diverse in lots of different ways is ensuring that the student learning experience is inclusive. And I thought maybe you could just expand a little bit on the way that the design labs encourage that inclusivity, if that's what they did. It certainly seemed like that's what they did.
Yeah, that's a great question, Keith. And the initial thinking behind designing these virtual labs was to allow everyone to have access to these sorts of resources, okay? And for people to learn in their own time and to access the virtual labs whenever they could, okay? Some people are working, some people have family commitments, okay? So the whole idea was to have this lab environment anytime, anywhere for students, provided they had a Wi-Fi or connection to, the links that we were providing them with. But what I have actually learned in COVID times now, as we're coming back, this hybrid scenario of the way we're teaching gives students the flexibility to join if they want an in-person experience or not. Yeah. It's their choice. It's on offer. So we give a lot of options, and we give a lot of information that allows students to work in their own time, in their own way. And the labs are always available. Okay. So I don't release the lesson and then stop it after everything's finished. There's no point in doing that.
Yeah. Fantastic. And as more and more students are older, they have got caring responsibilities. I can just see how it becomes woven into everything else that they're doing through their lives. Yeah. All right. Something that Kashmira put in the chat window, and I was intrigued about it as well. You had that wonderful little roadmap graphic showing the development of those attributes of the students over the 4-year or 3-year degree, and the way the portfolio was linked to that. So tell us, is there post university life care, or do they take the portfolio with them, or is there some kind of community they can still remain a part of once they graduate?
That's a great question as well, and these are questions that we're asking right now as we're starting to work out a portfolio concept across the university. The whole idea is that students do belong to a community, and it is within discipline initially, of course, and within degree program. But, you're part of the greater sphere of that University of New South Wales, community and village, if you can call it that. So, yes, the whole idea is that I think the best use of ePortfolios is if students take them with them and they develop it further. And what we're trying to, with time, I hope this flies, is develop skills in students for lifelong learning. So they may start with an ePortfolio way of doing and thinking, but then end up somewhere else. So it may set them up for working better in LinkedIn, or better in ResearchGate, or better in these other online communities.
Yeah.
Just a thought.
Yeah. Okay. Hans has got a question about the. I think it's related to the nano credentials, which I haven't heard before, and I love that term.
That's an in-house term that we tend to use.
Yeah, no, it's very good. Yeah, I mean, one of the great debates at the moment is what exactly is a micro-credential, because some people are saying micro-credentials can be, 6 weeks or even 12 weeks long, and some people are saying, you know, they're more akin to micro learning, which might be 3 minutes long. So it's a really flexible variable kind of space. Anyway, Hans said, what about potential inoculation effects of doing? Oh, go on, Hans. Do you want to ask the question? I'm sure you'll do a better job than I would.
Look, I'm really curious. I mean, it makes sense that you use in curriculum that you scale it to, you know, you size it up. What I'm curious about is whether or not there is an unintended side effect of an inoculation effect. Someone says, look, I've done my teamwork badge. What more would I need? So I'll give you an example. You may, just to size up the volume of a field, if you ask someone in the business college to size up emotional intelligence, they might go, well, turn it into a badge. Were you to ask that same skill set in the psychology faculty, you can imagine that they would size up emotional intelligence differently.
Correct.
So what's the story with, should we be a little bit protective of handing out the badge? Are we creating an intentionally, not the addiction effect, like, wow, this is fascinating, I want more. But what if people don't enter the shop and they just stick around with the specials bin?
Yeah, it's a good question. And that's the point of not making them low stakes. So low stakes, just showing up and getting the badge sort of thing, or traveling through your degree and getting a minimum badge. And that is something we still need to work up, to be honest with you. That's why university warranty is very important. That's why the linkage of that nano or badge, rather than a micro, what I would call a micro credential, is linked explicitly to that particular task. And you would need to collect many of those to demonstrate teamwork, probably over your degree program. So a constellation or ecosystem of teamwork in different contexts. Because teamwork changes depending on your course requirements, your program requirements. Teamwork in business may be different to teamwork in medical science. Context. So again, wrapping the context around it and making sense of what that particular, that's why I call it nano or badging, means for that assessment task. It's very granular what I've presented today. So it's a working concept. And you're right, what does it mean? So that's why the academic or the institution needs to warrant what happened at that particular point in time. And I would say date stamp it as well, because it could change.
Good. Yep. I think we need to be protective of brand. Like if you've got the UNSW brand, you might want to be
yes,
and that's of what that means.
And that's the point. You just can't be giving out badges here, there, and everywhere. They have to be earned. And if it's a higher stakes badge, you have to see what goes behind it in order to demonstrate how you've earned that badge. And it's date stamped and university verified. It is a problem if it can be counterfeited or used here, there, everywhere. So the conversation has to be, there's a lot of education behind it. The conversation has to come around an education piece as well. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Otherwise they're devalued.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Oriel, do you want to ask your question about authentic symposium assessment?
Yeah, sorry, taking you right back to the start again. I was really fascinated by that idea, but and I can see that they build their skills up. But do students initially see that as an advantage? I mean, how hard a sell was it to convince them that all this work, and it's 30% of your course, is going to be worth the effort? How did you convince them it was a good idea?
To reflect or to evaluate or to do the task or everything?
Well, it's the teamwork part of it that seems to have the most resistance.
Yeah, it is. And the whole idea is that this is part of your assessment task. I mean, we have to be very clear that there are components in the task. Although the teamwork aspect was only worth 5% compared to, you know, the rest, which was 20, and the other reflective blog was worth 5. So I did break it up. And people might say, well, it's only 5%. But the reality is students started to value that because I created a culture of team environment. We teach as a team in that course. We behave like collaborative, cooperative team members. They are, which I didn't talk about today, they are mentored by an ECR as part of that team. It's an expectation that we build professionalism all the way through the course. So it is an implicit thing that happens as part of our behaviour skill set. So we model it, we talk about it all the time. Done your teamwork, let's think about it. And you know what? Students were blogging about, I didn't expect to enjoy this task so much. I was a bit daunted when I came in, and by the end of it, I thought this was great. So it was really surprising, but you know, gratifying to see that. And it is worth 30%. You know, our tasks, we try not to create too many tasks with, say, you know, smaller percentages as part of our courses. So students do value it. And medical science is a very competitive degree program where students really are after every single mark that they can attain.
I bet they are. Yep, that's good. I'm reading some law reports where they've gone out into practice as their final course and actually pretended to be lawyers. And the one thing that's coming through is the reflection on, I'm part of a team. I didn't realize at law school that you needed these kinds of soft skills. So, you know, that's why I was wondering how you sell it to them as part of a normal course, not a placement course.
Oh, it's embedded in the cultural conversation that I have. This is who we are. We're a tribe of medical scientists. We are community. We are here together.
Sounds fantastic. Thank you.
All right. Well, I'm going to hand over to Kashmira to finish us off.
Yeah, thank you so much, Patsie. It was very interesting, and I have some questions, but I think I will ask you personally because it will go very long. It's about, you know, that ethical dilemma between whether every action or good action should be rewarded or not rewarded, and you know, that level. And but anyway, thank you. It was very interesting. I would also like to mention that our next webinar would be from our speaker would be from University of Edinburgh, and Tim Found will be presenting on Untitled Pedagogy. Now, because the speaker is from UK and because of the time difference, I guess we will have different times for this webinar. So we will have it 4 p.m. in the afternoon instead of 12 p.m. So I hope everybody here could join us there. And yeah, thank you for your attendance and question. That was very interesting. And I'll see you next webinar.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity once again. And once again, these are research projects. So if you've got any questions, let me know.
Yeah, sure.
Thanks, Patsie. Awesome.